There was a man who never commanded an army, never built a business, never held political office, and never owned more than the clothes on his back. He was born in a stable, in a small town most people in power had never heard of, to a carpenter's wife who had nowhere else to give birth. He never traveled more than a few hundred miles from that town in his entire life. And yet, more than 2,000 years after his final breath, his voice still reaches into hospital waiting rooms, prison cells, and quiet bedrooms at 3 in the morning, into every place where someone is asking the question you might be asking right now. Is there a reason for any of this? This is the story of Jesus Christ, told through the words he spoke that have outlived empires, survived wars, and somehow still find their way into lives today, 2,000 years after he said them. His public life began not in comfort, but in hunger. After he was baptized in the Jordan River, he walked alone into the desert and did not eat for 40 days. His body grew weak, his throat grew dry, his mind, worn thin by exhaustion, became the perfect target for a voice that offered him an easy way out. "If you are the Son of God," the voice said, "tell these stones to become bread." It was a reasonable request from a starving man, but Jesus, weak as he was, answered with a sentence that has steadied hungry hearts for 2,000 years. "Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." He was naming something we still don't want to admit, that the emptiness inside a person is rarely solved by the thing we assume will fix it. We chase money, applause, a relationship, a promotion, a drink, a scroll through our phone at midnight, and we still wake up hungry, because the hunger was never really about bread in the first place. Not long after, walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he came across a group of fishermen mending their nets after a long, exhausting night with nothing to show for it. He didn't ask about their resumes or their religious credentials. He simply said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." These were not impressive men. They smelled like fish, argued with each other, and would later abandon him out of fear. But he saw something in ordinary, tired people that the rest of the world had overlooked. They dropped their nets and followed him that same day. He didn't wait for them to become qualified first. He called them exactly as they were. Word of him spread quickly, and soon crowds followed him into the hills of Galilee. One afternoon, thousands sat on a grassy slope to hear him speak, and what he said that day became known as the Sermon on the Mount, possibly the most quoted speech in human history. He looked out at people who were poor, grieving, anxious, and overlooked by everyone who mattered, and instead of telling them to toughen up, he told them they were blessed. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." To people drowning in worry about money, food, and the future, he said something that still cuts through modern anxiety like a blade. "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Today has enough trouble of its own." And to people who had long since given up hope of ever being truly heard, he said, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you." On that hillside, tired, hungry, uncertain people heard, many of them for the first time in their lives, that their pain was not invisible. Not to him, and not to God. Not long after, Jesus and his closest followers were crossing the Sea of Galilee in a small wooden boat when a violent storm rose without warning. Waves crashed over the sides. These were experienced fishermen, men who had spent their whole lives on this water, and even they were certain they were about to drown. In the middle of the chaos, Jesus was asleep in the back of the boat. They shook him awake, terrified, and he stood up, looked out at the wind and the waves, and the storm simply stopped. Then he turned to the men still shaking in front of him and asked one quiet question. "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" That question has followed every person who has ever lain awake with their own storm crashing around them. A diagnosis, a debt, a marriage falling apart, a child who hasn't spoken to them in years. The water doesn't always go still the second we ask, but the question remains, patient and unhurried. In the middle of your storm, what or who are you actually trusting? Later, in Jerusalem, a woman was dragged into the street by a furious crowd of religious leaders who had caught her in adultery. The law demanded demanded she be stoned to death, and they were already holding the rocks. They brought her to Jesus, not really to ask his judgment, but to trap him. If he forgave her, he was breaking the law. If he condemned her, he was no different from the mob. He crouched down, wrote something in the dust, and said quietly, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." One by one, the men holding rocks lowered their hands and walked away, until no one was left standing there except Jesus and the woman who, moments earlier, had been certain she was about to die. He looked at her and said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin." Somewhere right now, someone reading or hearing this story is holding their own rocks, not at another person, but at themselves, for something they did years ago that they still can't forgive themselves for. That sentence was written for them too. He told a story of his own once, about a younger son who demanded his inheritance early, left home, and burned through it all on a wasted, reckless life until he was feeding pigs for a living and eating their food just to survive. Ashamed and starving, he finally decided to go home and beg his father to take him back, even just as a servant. But Jesus said something the audience didn't expect. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and ran to meet him. Not waited at the door with arms crossed, ran. Before the apology was even finished, before any explanation was given, the father had already wrapped his arms around his son and called for a celebration. It's a story about a father, but everyone listening understood exactly who it was really about. Whatever you've wasted, whatever you've done, however far you've wandered, the story suggests the road home is shorter than your shame has convinced you it is. There was also a close friend of Jesus named Lazarus, who fell sick and died while Jesus was still on the road to reach him. By the time he arrived, Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. His sister Mary collapsed at Jesus' feet in grief, and Jesus himself, we're told, wept, not pretending the loss didn't hurt, but feeling the full weight of it. Only then did he say the words that have been spoken at countless funerals since. "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die." He didn't lecture Mary about why she shouldn't be sad. He grieved with her first, and only after that spoke about hope. It's a small detail, easy to miss, but it says something enormous. Grief and faith were never meant to cancel each other out. On the last night before his death, Jesus gathered his 12 closest friends in an upper room. He knew exactly what was coming: the betrayal, the trial, the cross, and instead of running from it, he knelt down and washed their dusty feet with his own hands, a job reserved for the lowest servant in any household. Then he left them one final instruction to carry forward once he was gone. "A new command I give you: love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." Not their certainty, not their theology, not even their faith. Love was meant to be the proof. The next day, he was nailed to a cross between 2 criminals, accused of crimes he hadn't committed, abandoned by nearly everyone who had followed him. As the nails went in and the crowd jeered below, he looked at the people responsible for his death and said something almost impossible to fully grasp. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Not after they apologized, not after they understood what they'd done. While it was still happening, it remains one of the hardest sentences in human history to actually live out, and one of the most freeing, because it suggests forgiveness was never really about whether the other person had earned it. 3 days later, the women who came to grieve at his tomb found it empty. A figure told them not to be afraid, and soon Jesus himself appeared to his stunned, grieving friends, very much alive. Again and again, in different moments, the first thing he said to them was simple: "Do not be afraid." Not that fear was forbidden, he had felt it himself, the night before his death. But that whatever came next, it didn't get the final word. Death, it turned out, wasn't the end of the story, after all. None of these were ever meant to be clever lines printed on a poster. Each one was spoken in the middle of real hunger, real storms, real shame, real grief, real betrayal, and real death, which is exactly why they've carried the weight of 2,000 years of human suffering without without breaking under it. So if tonight you're hungry for something you can't quite name, anxious about a tomorrow you can't control, ashamed of something you can't undo, or grieving someone you can't get back, you are standing in the exact place where these words were first spoken. The question they leave behind was never really about history. It's about you, right now. Which one of these words are you going to carry into tomorrow?